Welcome to the fifth episode of Dialog Yoga. I'm Varun, Head of Product Design at Innovator. Today we are going to talk about effective communication. I have Andy Burtis joining me here. He's our Chief Marketing Officer. Hi Andy, welcome to Dialog Yoga.
Hey Varun, thanks for having me.
I'm quite excited. So Andy, the way people work has changed after pandemic, and we are a global organization. We attend meetings virtually. We do our one-on-ones virtually. We are even recording this podcast on Zoom. So between all of this, what's the secret sauce to effective communication?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a very timely topic. And I think maybe a point that I would share up front is that, as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So even though we are living in this very unusual world at the moment, I think that some of the key principles of effective communication are more important than ever. So I think the topics that we're going to talk through today are in many ways universally relevant to communications, both during the pandemic and after, but maybe especially important to pay attention to today. So I think what we're going to do today is talk about, rather than the typical top 10 list of best practices, we're going to talk about the top 5 list in the name of brevity. So I think I'll jump into best practice number 1, which is a little bit counterintuitive, but my view is that in some ways the most important part of good communication is listening. We often think about communication as what we say, but communication is obviously at least a two-way street. And I think that effective communication has to be grounded in effective listening. And there's a great phrase that I've heard before, which is, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. And it's a good reminder of how important it is to use those 2 ears to really listen deeply to what the other person is trying to say, so that you can effectively communicate together. And so I'm curious, Varun, if that resonates with you.
Yep, definitely. But do you have thoughts on how people could listen more effectively?
Yeah, I think that one of the most important techniques for listening effectively is to play back what you hear from the other person to make sure that you really heard it correctly. So for example, Varun, you just asked me, is there a way to really practice effective listening? And I just shared with you a thought on that topic. So I think that kind of active validation of playing back what you heard the other person say is a really important, it's a really important technique, both in writing and in speech.
Mm-hmm.
So that really yeah, go ahead, Varun.
Yeah, especially now that people do a lot of meetings and communication on Zoom, how could this active listening work there? And like, how could just people be more active about listening and not get distracted?
Yeah, it's a great question, especially with Zoom calls that quite often involve multiple people, and so at times it can be a little bit challenging to enter into the conversation without being distracting. So I think one of the ways you can do that is just using chat. And that's so much a part of our new world, whether you're chatting within Zoom or whether you're chatting using Google Chat, whichever chat feature you use. I think you can very easily basically paraphrase what you think you just heard from the listener in the chat feature, as a way of giving them an opportunity to either confirm that you heard it correctly, or if perhaps you misinterpreted part of what they had to say, it gives them the opportunity to clarify, so you both walk away with a clear understanding of the intended message.
Mm-hmm. That's a great tip.
Cool. All right. So I think I'll move on to the next best practice, which is what I would summarize as less is more. And I think this is a maxim, again, that applies in just about any situation. But everyone is really short on time. And so I think that the more concise you can be in your communication, the more respect you show to your listener or to your reader. So I think it is really important to strive for being concise. You may be familiar with the famous Mark Twain saying that I would have written you a shorter letter if I had had the time, which I think is a really interesting way of thinking about things. So I think that really concentrating on less is more is an important way of communicating effectively. And along those lines, I would say, try to keep things crayon simple or Sesame Street simple. It's very tempting to embellish language, to include a lot more description than is required. And I think if you practice the sort of approach of keeping things crayon simple, it generally allows your message to come through a lot more effectively. And Varun is someone who I know has a great appreciation for really clean and spare design. I suspect this resonates with you.
Yeah, and I like that metaphor, crayon simple or Sesame Street simple. So basically, like being concise, brief, and I would assume that it takes hard work to distill your thoughts.
Yeah, again, back to the Mark Twain example of writing a shorter letter. It definitely requires a thoughtfulness to make sure that you are really placing the emphasis on the points that you're really trying to get through, and to avoid any gratuitous kind of words or language that just get in the way. So you raised the point of kind of metaphors, and that leads into the next best practice that I wanted to cover. And it's I'll introduce it using this phrase that someone once shared with me, and that is, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and a metaphor is worth 1,000 pictures. And I think that's a really powerful way to think about things. So whenever you are trying to communicate something, especially if it's technical or complex, if you're able to do it using a metaphor or an analogy, I think it makes it both easier for your audience to understand, and it makes it more memorable. I think it's easier for people to remember metaphors, analogies, stories, and whatnot than it is to remember thick descriptions. So one example of that, I was on the phone the other day with someone who was just getting to know Innovaccer, and he was asking me, how do you explain what Innovaccer does in really simple terms in a sentence? And I said, well, if I had to boil it down to, kind of a simple explanation, I would say that Innovaccer connects the dots in healthcare, right? We connect the dots between the physician, the payer, the patient, potentially the life sciences company. We connect the dots inside a health system. We connect the dots between settings, between systems. But that's basically what we do, is we connect the dots across healthcare so that patients can receive whole person care. And that notion of connecting the dots is something that I think anyone can relate to, and it definitely helped him to get his mind around what we do. So I just think that's a really important best practice. Wherever possible, try to use a metaphor or an analogy to help people really understand what it is you're trying to communicate. And again, Varun, I know you've got a very creative mind, and I know you're a firm believer in this principle.
Oh yeah. There's one question though. So I've heard this a lot of times. People struggle to distill their thoughts or communicate things well when they are creating presentations and presenting them in general, right? So what could be some tips to have more effective visual communication on presentations?
It's a really good question, and I think what I would say is, it's tempting when you're building a slide to want to communicate everything, to communicate your entire story on one slide. And I think that it's far more effective to just pick one thing, and to pick one picture or one image that communicates the single most important point that you are trying to make in the slide, and to leave everything else essentially out of the discussion. Because the fact is that people have a hard time really taking away anything more than one point from a slide. So don't try to communicate any more than one point in a slide, and find the perfect picture or cartoon or image or other piece of artwork that communicates that single point that you want to get across in the slide, and save the next point for the next slide.
Makes sense. And I'm notorious for using memes on slides, so it also makes the environment light.
And it kind of leads into the final best practice that I wanted to talk about a little bit, which I guess I would broadly characterize as how to bring energy to your communications. And there are multiple ways that that happens. I think your example of a meme is really a great example, because a meme, as you say, it brings energy, it brings levity, people laugh, it reflects a thoughtfulness. You took the time to go find the meme, it's on point. It just creates a connection with the audience, and by doing that, I think you bring a level of energy to the communication that creates engagement, and that's really what you're after when it comes to communication. Is you're trying to create engagement with the audience. And so, in addition to the meme example, which I think is a really good one, I think it's also important to remember that nonverbal communication, many would say that anywhere from 70 to 90% of communication is nonverbal. And so I think it's really important to be mindful of how you are communicating in nonverbal ways, especially in the era of Zoom and being part of a global workforce and working across time zones and so forth. I think that it's important to bring a level of intention to the energy that you create in your communications. And part of that is just pacing yourself. We have the option of turning our camera on, turning our camera off on Zoom, and there's no right answer. But I would say that, any day, especially a day in Innovacer, is a little bit of a marathon. And so you have to really decide how are you going to pace yourself? And there are times where I think you want your camera off to just have a little bit of, time to refresh and not feel like you're on air, so to speak. And then there are other times where you've got a really important point you want to make. And it makes a lot of sense to turn on the camera because it allows you to make that point both verbally and through nonverbal cues that I think really help you deliver the message in a more compelling way. So I would just be really mindful of how you bring energy to your communications as a way of making them as effective as possible. So that's kind of my take there. And Varun, wondering if you have any commentary on that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And a lot of times, because people work cross-culturally, their words could have different meaning, and there could be gap in communication. But body language is something that's more universal. And if the other person is looking at you and they could look at your expressions, I think the right message would get communicated.
I guess the last point that I would emphasize, and this really came from you, Varun, but I think it's a really good one and a great place to end, is to really make sure that you're having fun with your communications. And I will cite a recent example. We were very, of course, proud as a company to win the Best in Class award for population health at the end of or in the early part of this year. And we had this customer appreciation event for our customers to celebrate the class recognition. And it was basically we had a virtual dance party with a DJ, and it was so fun. And I know our customers had a great time, and it was a great example of where we could have just, I don't know, sort of mailed it in, held a boring virtual meeting and had a couple of boring virtual speeches, and the whole thing would have been fairly boring and unremarkable. And instead, the team. Go ahead.
I was just saying that would have been real fun.
Yeah, exactly. And instead it was just a hoot. I mean, I think that our customers had a great time, and it was just a great example of bringing fun to an experience with great intention. And I think that goes a long way toward boosting the energy and really making sure that the communication objectives are met in a big way, and that people remember it with a great degree of kind of fondness. So that's the last best practice: have fun. And Varun, any kind of final thoughts from you?
No, this is perfect. And just trying to go back on the points we covered. So we talked about listening as part of effective communication. We talked about less is more. We talked about using pictures and metaphors to put across your idea. We talked about body language and energy, and we talked about having fun.
Exactly. And that's a good top 5 list. And in the name of brevity, I think we will end here. But it's been a terrific conversation, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And
yeah, thanks, Andy.
Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I would like to thank Andy and Varun for such a beautiful summary about acing communication skills. I cannot wait to incorporate them into my routine. In fact, I would like to thank all our jockeys who signed up with Dialog Yoga and shared their experiences about various behavioral skills that can come in handy at a workplace.
I totally echo that, Garima. All these podcasts have really equipped us well in managing our work life in a better way. Cannot believe that we made it so far.
I know, right, Mrinalini? Starting from those company-wide behavioral sessions to those team-specific trainings, and now we have these Dialog Yoga podcasts. I think that we guys have truly come a long way. And I think as 2021 is around the corner, maybe we can incorporate something new to our initiative. What do you think?
Sounds like a plan, Natasha.
Great. So let's do this, guys. So stay tuned, everyone. Watch this space for more, and we'll be soon disclosing our roadmap for 2021. Till then, thank you so much for tuning in, everyone.